All right, so squeaky-voiced reactionary conservative Ben Shapiro, an intellectual titan battling it out in the marketplace of ideas, was recently confronted by an Iowa State University student who was essentially trying to press him on his definition of wokeness in the modern political climate. So we're going to go ahead and watch this clip. It's a little bit long, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on all of this afterwards.
So do you come from Holocaust survivors, or are you a Jewish family that didn't?
So my great-great-grandparents arrived here. A lot of our extended family was killed in the Holocaust, but our immediate
Your
family...
great-great-grandparents, but not your grandparents.
Right.
Oh, do you have friends whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors or anything like that?
Of course, many of them. Yeah, I've helped write memoirs of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah. Their families are kind of messed up, right? Like, my family is very messed up.
I mean, if you go through a trauma like the Holocaust,
they teach that trauma between generations. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, trauma very often in a lot of circumstances is passed down. I mean, I know some kids of Holocaust survivors who are now fantastic and some who didn't. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, so you are officially woke. That is what wokeness is about. It's like, people's grandparents or their great-grandparents were slaves.
Well, it's okay. No, it's okay. Guys,
Fuck you! I'm talking.
Guys, I actually want to hear. I want to hear. It's okay. I want to hear. Let's at least hear the argument. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Go.
What? He wants to hear me.
I do want to hear it. It's fine. Let him go. Let's hear it.
Come on.
So explain how that's woke.
So, I mean, the whole thing is like, let's see. So during Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge's administration, do you know about like the Great Mississippi Flood back in the 1930s?
I understand that American history is filled with racial evil.
Yeah. And that causes some intergenerational trauma, which affects people's ability to be, effective, and things like that.
Fine. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So if the idea is that history has consequences, of course that's true. That's not wokeness.
Yeah.
That is not wokeness. What wokeness suggests is that fundamental institutions in American society
it doesn't.
Yes, it 100% does.
I ran Elizabeth Warren's campaign. I helped organize her volunteers around here. I am a representative of wokeness.
Okay, well,
and that's this is all it is.
Well,
when I went to go get my first tattoo, the guy had lightning bolts and 88s tattooed on his neck. And as a Jewish person, that's really messed up. It's basically a threat.
There are racist people who exist. The argument that you're making, and I'm going to close with this because this is going in weird directions, and I don't really want to.
No, it's not.
I don't really want to get. Just hold up a second. I let you get out your arguments. Now it's time for me to respond. So I let you say.
Okay, I'll let you respond, but
no, not but. Now's my turn.
You are not characterizing what I'm saying accurately.
Now it's my turn. Your definition is inaccurate. The reason your definition is inaccurate is because any sentient human being would acknowledge that history has consequences.
Right.
But if the idea is, but that's not what wokeism is. Wokeism is a different thing. Wokeism suggests that all inequalities of today are attributable to not only historic injustices, but also continuing injustices in the now, and that all disparity is attributable to discrimination.
Like that, but a conservative.
Not just that.
A conservative is the only person. I want to know why. Why is it that conservatives are the only people who define it like that? Why are conservatives the only people?
Okay, so we're gonna have to stop here because this is going nowhere. But
what's up?
I'm gonna have to stop with this with you because this is going nowhere. All I'm going to say is this.
I just am trying to understand your perspective. Just one more second. On a fundamental level, you're shifting definitions to avoid the consequences of your own argument. And if the idea is, and final point, if you are going to hold on, if you are also, just final points to sum up there. Final point to sum up.
I can follow that.
Yeah, I just want to make, honestly, I want to make one final point to sum up there. If the idea is that traumas of the past invariably bleed down into the present, that does not explain why certain groups that have been historically not only marginalized but slaughtered in mass genocide are some of the most successful groups in our society. So if the idea is that past trauma always equals current inequality, or that my actions in, say, robbing a convenience store are attributable to bad actions that happened in Alabama in 1930, the answer to that is no. Don't rob the convenience store. The only way they're going to be able to break the chain of history is to make good decisions. What people on the left don't like to talk about is actual solutions. What they like to do is bitch about problems that existed 60 years ago and blame those for failures to solve them now.
Okay, so listen, I mean, there was a lot of back and forth and trying to dissect their individual definitions of wokeness, I think is really not the main point here. And really, the overarching point is that conservatives don't have a definition of wokeness that is tied to anything in reality. For them, as Ben Shapiro was accusing that speaker, that student of doing, of shifting his definitions, that's exactly what conservatives do with the term wokeness. I mean, wokeness used to be something that was like vaguely referring to, SJW warriors or something like that, who were social justice warriors who were going overboard from the perspective of conservatives. Now, wokeness is just deployed as a defense mechanism for literally everything that conservatives oppose. I mean, you hear conservatives saying that you're woke if you want to teach students about the accurate history of the United States. You'll be called woke if you're somebody who's pushing for Medicare for all or for addressing climate change. I mean, it literally could apply to anything that has anything to do with opposing a reactionary conservative agenda. So the term wokeness doesn't have a hard definition in the way that Ben Shapiro is trying to do like a gotcha on him in this sense. But on top of that, I mean, it is an Elizabeth Warren supporter, so I don't know how much we could expect from this person, but credit to him for actually going and standing up and trying to get some of these arguments in front of a obviously hostile crowd. And that's another point that needs to be made here is look at the crowd. I mean, look at how Ben Shapiro reacts to somebody even just mildly pushing back on his beliefs. These are the same people who want you to believe that they are the biggest proponents of free speech and that they're anti-censorship and they just want to battle it out in the marketplace of ideas. And here they are literally cheering for this guy having himself physically removed from the microphone and then walked outside. I mean, this is exactly what they are. They don't care about free speech. They don't care about the marketplace of ideas. All they care about is their ideology winning out in the end, and they're going to do whatever they need to in order to make that happen. Now, on the other substantive point, I guess if there was anything of substance to get from this, it would be Ben Shapiro's own definition of what he calls wokeness, but what I would call is really just an accurate recounting of how history affects the modern political climate and the modern economic situation that we have right now in the United States. So if you are Ben Shapiro and you're admitting that history has reverberating effects generations down the line, then how do you not understand the notion that centuries and centuries of a country that was built on the backs of slaves, that then had to suffer under 100 years post-Civil War in the United States, 100 years of overt discrimination in the form of Jim Crow laws, segregation, etc. How do you not recognize that being the case merely, half a century ago is going to have reverberating effects to this day? And really what this comes down to is what he said there at the end. It's all about hyper-individualism. It's all about this overarching structure of defending the modern capitalist system and the neoliberal system that we have in place right now. That was his whole point of what he was saying at the end there, by pointing out that, yes, there are some Jewish people who have managed to become incredibly successful on the global stage or here in the United States, even though they had to suffer under, for example, the Holocaust. But that's not even really comparable to the situation that Black Americans have been subjected to for centuries in this country. It's not, these two different situations are completely, not comparable, in my opinion, at least, because in the United States, we had overt laws in place. We had a system of slavery. We had, Jim Crow laws, etc. And even to this day, we have Republicans all across the country trying to restrict voting rights, trying to pass ridiculously gerrymandered districts that are specifically intended to subvert the ability for Black voters in this country to participate in our so-called democracy. So the overarching message of what he's trying to push there at the end by doing this comparison and saying, well, look, some Jewish people have managed to become incredibly successful despite the things they've been through, or even some Black Americans have managed to become incredibly successful even though the deck is stacked against them. His whole point is we don't have to address any of these historic ills. We don't have to address any of the institutions that are maintaining a lot of these inequalities that still exist in the United States today, like, for example, the Black-white wealth inequality that we see right now. He would rather, instead of addressing those systems, instead of approaching this from the perspective of like reparations, for example, for Black Americans, instead of approaching it from that systemic change level, he just wants to approach it from a purely individual level and just say it's all Black Americans' fault right now who are alive in this instance specifically for making bad decisions, I guess. He thinks that the entirety of, again, for example, the Black-white wealth gap in this country exists because of individual bad decisions. It's just completely ahistorical, completely delusional, racist on top of that. And, again, it's just part of this broader message that conservatives are weaponizing terms like wokeness to try to just portray any systemic change as if it's this evil part of this cultural Marxist takeover of the country. But just as another reminder here in terms of how much hypocrisy there is within the modern conservative movement in terms of, free speech and censorship, it wasn't just this crowd specifically, it's also in legislation that we've seen passed all around the country. So Conservatives like Ben Shapiro like to pretend like they're the free speech warriors and they're anti-censorship. Well, I mean, here from The Guardian, unparalleled in intensity, 1,500 book bans in U.S. school districts. The past 9 months have seen censorship effort that is unparalleled in its intensity, with books on race and LGBTQ issues singled out. So this is them engaging in the censorship that they like to pretend like it's the left doing. And again, we had other instances like the Don't Say Gay bill down in Florida. Here from NBC News, they say Don't Say Gay bill. Florida Senate passes controversial LGBT school measure. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis has signaled he would sign the bill, which would ban classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary schools. So again, this is just part of this continuation of a reactionary agenda that only serves the interest of wealthy capitalists in this country who have profited off of the same institutions and the same economic model that, again, has for centuries in this country disproportionately harmed black communities and minority communities. So again, it's just a part of that overarching structure, as well as trying to push this, religious, so-called family values, conservative approach to social issues as well. But just as one more example here, in terms of how little conservatives care about maintaining an actual, principled belief in any of the things they're talking about, in the wake of Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, here's what Ben Shapiro had to say. He says, here's what Musk should do. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission revealing past manipulation, algorithmic transparency. I agree with that. But here's the key point that he hones in on. Fire a lot of people. Okay, the same guy who, if this was a conservative institution or a conservative company in this specific instance, would use this as a primary example of so-called cancel culture, literally trying to get people fired for their political beliefs. But he says the last is the most crucial point. If you leave in place the woke progressives who control implementation, leadership matters little. So listen, again, this is just part of the same overarching structure where conservatives don't actually care, as they are pretending to right now, as even Elon Musk is pretending to right now. They don't care about dismantling the corporate influence that exists in this case with social media. They don't care about dismantling the oppressive institutions within society that beat down working class people of all races and ethnicities. All they care about is having somebody with their ideology at the top of that power structure. So I mean, that's the lesson at the end of the day. I mean, this is just a perfect clip to give us a perspective in terms of the rank hypocrisy that exists within reactionary pundits and commentators and Republican politicians as well in the modern climate. Is they don't actually care about any of the things that they're pretending to. They shift definitions. They use broad generic terms like wokeness to basically attack any left-wing systemic change, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on the economy, whether it's on social issues. It doesn't matter. They're just going to call everything a woke cultural Marxist takeover of the country in order to serve the interests of the wealthy capitalists that fund money into enterprises like Ben Shapiro's media.